1973, I'll tell you, I'll start it by telling you a funny name-dropping story. So, this sounds like the beginning of a joke, too. Bill Clinton's cleaning out his drawers in the White House, leaving on January, whatever it is, 2001, and he's going through some old papers, and he finds, this is a true story, he finds a copy of Time magazine from the middle 1970s entitled The 50 Faces for the Future, and it had 50 young people who Time magazine thought would be future American leaders, and most of them you've never heard of. Time isn't very good at doing this. But on the third or fourth page, it was alphabetical, under C and D. Under C, it has young Bill Clinton, Attorney General of Arkansas, very young, and it says youngest professor, Dershowitz, and those are two people of the future. And Bill Clinton writes me a little note and sends me the Time magazine saying, "See, Alan, we've always been on the same page." Very nice to get that from the president. But then I looked at the blurb that described me, and it said, Alan Dershowitz, young this, civil liberties, civil rights. But his mother is furious at him because since 1973 he has opposed the civilian settlements on the West Bank, and I had written an op-ed and signed a petition against the building of Elan Moreh, which was the first religious non-security settlement on the West Bank, and I thought it was a problem. I didn't think it was a legal problem. I thought it was a problem in terms of what the ultimate resolution of the conflict ought to be, and that's been my position since 1973. You might disagree with it, but it's been my position, and it's a position I've maintained consistently. So I'm not going to oppose the Obama administration when it simply opposes Israel and the settlements. That's my view. I voted for the administration knowing its position on the settlements, and it's a position that I share. So until recently, I've had no reason to question the Obama administration. I've had reason to concern myself about what would happen with Iran, whether if Israel needed to attack, and we'll talk about that, the United States would try to stop them, but I've had no reason to doubt it. And so what happened this week is, as you probably all know, this goes back a long time. I have to start with a little bit of history. So Bibi Netanyahu, who I've known since 1973, narrowly beats Tzipi Livni, gets more votes, and gets more votes than Kadima, and more votes than the Labour Party, so he's asked to form a coalition. He cannot form a coalition alone. He cannot form a coalition just with Labour. He either has to include in his coalition Kadima, the centralist party, or if they won't join, he has to include one of the more extreme religious parties. He doesn't want to have the religious party. He'd rather have Kadima. He approaches Tzipi Livni and offers her foreign minister, deputy prime minister, and she turns him down. And she says, no, only if I'm prime minister will I join your coalition. I am critical of her for doing that. I think she should have put the interests of Israel before her own political interests. All right, that's history. So he invites the Shas party to join the coalition, and the Shas Minister of Interior deliberately, willfully, and with a clear state of mind decides to embarrass Bibi Netanyahu by embarrassing Vice President Biden. This was not a decision made by Benjamin Netanyahu. This was not a decision made by the Israeli government. It was a decision made by the leader of Shas, who was this Minister of the Interior. Once the decision was made and announced, of course the administration has to stand behind it, or the coalition will crumble. And so it was the Minister of the Interior who created this very, very difficult problem. It should have been resolved in one day. Biden should have said, I thoroughly disagree, I'm embarrassed, you've mortified me, now let's go on and be friends. That's not what happened. What happened is, after he made that statement, and after Netanyahu apologized, and after Netanyahu explained it, Obama told Hillary Clinton, you must call Netanyahu, and you have to not only talk to him and rank him over the coals for 45 minutes, but I want your spokesman to tell the world that you did that. I want you to embarrass him. And he did that, and then Obama sent out his Axelrod and others on Sunday morning shows to continue it. Then they sent out Petraeus to tell the American people a lie, a deliberate lie. General Petraeus has basically said to the American people that if Israel builds houses in East Jerusalem, American soldiers will die in Iraq. That is a categorical lie. That is worse than the lie over weapons of mass destruction. And when an American member of the military lies to the American public, there is something very wrong with that. And I challenge General Petraeus to back up that statement. There is no relationship between what Israel does in the settlements and how American soldiers fare in Iraq or Afghanistan. Think of the implications of that. If that were true, it would mean that all of Israel's policies would have to be determined by whether the Arabs in Iraq or the Arabs in Afghanistan like us. I mean, the implication of that is Israel should do nothing. Israel should just disappear. Because if Israel continues to exist, it may mean that American soldiers will lose their lives. It's a terrible argument. It's a false argument. And it's an argument which ultimately is destructive of the peace process. And so I think this administration has made a terrible mistake. This administration has set back the peace process. They've made it much harder to make peace than it would have been. Israelis today hold the Obama administration in the lowest respect of any administration in modern history. You cannot make peace with a democracy, and that's Israel, unless the democracy has faith in those who are trying to participate in the peace process. And not only did Obama lose his own credibility, which was very low already, but he forced Hillary Clinton to lose much of her credibility as well. She regained some of that today when she made statements that were a little bit more nuanced. But this is a terrible, terrible mistake for the United States, for the peace process. The only winners have been the Palestinians, who now have more and more excuses to move away from the peace process. The big loser is the peace process. The second big loser is the Obama administration. And the third big loser is Israel. And what we don't want is a conflict between the United States and Israel. I don't see that happening. Although Petraeus is trying to create that conflict, because he's turning to American people and telling them your soldiers, your boys, your girls in Iraq are being put in danger by Israel. That is a terrible thing to say and a wrong thing to say. And I'm holding my views in abeyance, but I have to tell you now, I am uncertain about where my support will go in the future, and it very much depends on how the United States handles this issue. This issue doesn't only involve Israel. This issue involves American credibility with its allies. An American president or vice president can't say on Monday, we have an unshakable commitment to your security, and then unshakable, and then on Thursday saying there's a crisis about American-Israeli relations. If it's unshakable, then a disagreement can't be resolved by threatening to withdraw this kind of support. And that's precisely what this administration is threatening to do. And what it seems to be doing is crossing over between security issues and settlement issues. So I'm very concerned about the relationship between the Obama administration and Israel. I'm far less concerned about the relationship between the United States and Israel. And the thing about a democracy is an administration only represents the democracy as long as it has the support of the voters in the democracy. And that, in a democracy, is always up for grabs. And let everybody remember that.
In the eyes of some, shattered U.S. credibility because there was no continuity from administration to administration. Can you talk a little bit about this evolution of U.S. thinking from Bush to Obama, and whether our credibility is being diminished because of this change?
I'm not sure I see the great difference that you do. We have to go back a little bit too. I was involved in a very small way in helping to draft UN Resolution 242, which came out of the 1967 war. I had been Justice Goldberg's law clerk, and when Justice Goldberg went to the UN, he knew I had an interest in the Middle East. He asked me to come over and spend time with him in his Waldorf Astoria apartment at the UN, and I was involved a little bit in the drafting of 242, and I know its history. And 242 says Israel should return territories, not the territories, not all the territories, but territories, in exchange for full recognition and full peace from the Arab countries. Number one, Israel has not gotten full recognition and full peace from the Arab countries, so it owes nothing under 242. Second, even if it did get recognition, it is not obliged to return all the territories. It doesn't have to go back to what Abba Eban called the Auschwitz lines, or what Arthur Goldberg and Lord Carrington said were indefensible lines. And everybody knows that, and that's why Israel has built on Ma'ale Adumim, why the Etzion bloc, which was always a Jewish bloc, will remain in Israeli hands, and why the section of East Jerusalem in which all this fuss is about will remain Jewish. And the question is not whether Israel will be forced to go back to the 67 lines. No American administration, not this one, not Hillary Clinton, not Barack Obama, believes that. The question is whether when Israel annexes, as part of the final resolution, when it annexes some of the land, whether it has to give up an equal amount of land in other parts of Israel near the Afula Triangle up in the northern Galilee. And for me, I think the answer to that should be yes. I think that it would be fair for Israel to give some land in that other area which is not related to security. So I don't think there's a big difference between the administration and the previous administration. There's no difference in the lyrics. There is a little difference in the music. And sometimes the difference in the music may make all the difference in the world. And I'm very nervous about the difference in the music. You know, as I said, I can't emphasize this strongly enough. I disagree with what Hillary Clinton said. I disagree a little bit with what Biden said. But I think what the generals are saying is dangerous, false, undemocratic, and really, really very, very bad. And that's where the emphasis should be. This argument that Israel's policies on the West Bank will contribute to the deaths of American soldiers is a disastrous argument for the Israeli relationship with this administration.
Thank you. Your father grew up in Tehran. My family's been in Tehran for a long time. You automatically get citizenship, and I don't. There's no law of return for us. Can you walk us through your thoughts on that?
Sure. First of all, there is a law of return. The Palestinian Authority has passed a law of return. Every Palestinian will have a right to return to the Palestinian state when a Palestinian state is established. China has a law of return. Germany has a law of return. I think there are 35 countries that have laws of return. Israel has the most right to have a law of return, of course, because Israel was established on the ashes of the Holocaust, largely as the result of the fact that no country in the world, not Cuba, not the United States, not Canada, would accept a Jew. You know, the Canadian Interior Minister infamously said, even one is too many, when asked if he would accept 500 Jewish children. Even one is too many. Of course, a state that is established as a reaction to that kind of horrible racism is going to say, no Jew will ever be turned away from Israel. No Jew will ever be turned away from Israel. The answer I would give to the Palestinians is, your family was born in Tehran, they can't go back to Tehran. 700,000 Jews whose families lived for thousands of years before the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, who lived in Iraq before it was called Iraq, who lived in North Africa before the countries even existed, who contributed significantly to the life of Persia, whose history appears in the Bible. These people have been chased out of their lands. There's been an exchange of population. Approximately 700,000 Palestinians left the Israeli areas, and about 780,000 Jews were forced out of Yemen and Egypt and all these other countries. There have been many exchanges of population. After the Second World War, the Sudeten Germans had to leave the Czechoslovakia. After the peace and the division of India into Pakistan and Kashmir, millions of people had to leave and couldn't go back to their homes. In Cyprus, the same thing happened. Why are you the only refugee group in the world that hasn't settled your refugees? Why are you the only ones who have camps? Yeah, the Palestinians have a grievance against the Jordanians, against the Kuwaitis, against the Egyptians, against the Saudis, against all the Arab countries that have exploited them. The one country they don't have a grievance against is Israel, and the proof of that is, look at the Palestinians who live in Israel today. A million Arabs live in Israel. A recent poll asked them, would you like to emigrate to a Palestinian state? 92% said no. No, we'd much prefer to live in Israel, where there's freedom of speech and freedom of religion, where they don't ask you whether you're a Sunni or a Shia, and they don't ask you whether or not you practice your religion in this way or that way, and they don't prevent you from getting a haircut from a man if you're a woman, they don't prevent you from driving if you're a woman, and they don't prevent you from living if you're gay. And so you can understand why the Israeli Arabs have a higher per capita income, longer lifespan, better health care than Arabs anywhere else in the Middle East. And so that's what I would tell my friend from Palestine, and I've told that to my friends from Palestine. I work very closely with Palestinian students at Harvard. When Yasser Arafat died, and a terribly untimely death, if he had only died 5 years earlier, we might have had peace. Because he wouldn't have been there when Jimmy Carter advised him to turn down Camp David and Taba. But when he died, many years too late, the Palestinian students wanted to put up a flag to a Palestinian